Hello, everyone. This is an astrology report for April 29th. Um, I have been thinking about doing some of these astrology transit reports in the form of videos. I haven't really been doing it that much recently, but I recently did a Scorpio full moon video where I didn't really get around to talking about Mars and Cancer. So I'm going to talk a bit about that. Um, the thing is that there's a lot going on. The sun's also applying a conjunction to Uranus right now. So to me, it just sort of makes sense to kind of talk about everything that's going on rather than just sort of doing one thing at a time, because it might be kind of convenient and organized to just break it into one placement or one transit at a time, but that's not really how it works. Is that you kind of have everything going on all at once. So let's see. Okay, let's start. So Mars and Cancer. um, Cancer is a sign of the moon, and Mars has its fall in Cancer. So that already tells you something, that a Mars and Cancer transit might bring up some difficulties. Um, what's the exact nature of those difficulties? Well, to start, I mean, if you think about the moon stands for family, for mothers, for kind of like the bonding between infant and child, infant and mother bonding, this sort of like kind of warm, nurturing connection. It stands for like the summer solstice, so the where everything is kind of lush and abundant and all this kind of thing. Um, Mars Mars is a severing quality. It's got this sort of like, it can stand for injuries and inflammations, and it's kind of like, I think part of the problem where you've got Mars in the fall of the moon sign is because the moon, this whole moon lunar stuff tends to be very kind of like soft and sensitive, and Mars is like putting a sharp object in a soft and sensitive place, or like it's almost like I'm thinking of like irritation, right? Like if you've got like some sort of like if you're wearing clothes and you've got something like sticking out, like a sharp thing pointing out and scratching you, and you're kind of like, oh, what's this? That's, it's a little bit of like that irritation with Mars and Cancer, right? um and it's so that's kind of, it's like Mars in this place where it isn't supposed to be, causing an irritation, causing eruption in this sensitive area. um there's also something about it that's what I've noticed too, is that there's this kind of like, it could be this thing too about like the moon, it stands for the stuff that's kind of like, their lunar side is kind of like our more inferior side, and I don't want to just, it's not this kind of thing about like the you don't want to get caught up in this masculine thing where it's like the feminine side is like inferior to the male side. But that's kind of like, if you think about the archetype between the sun and the sun with its bright light, its shining kind of beams, it's like, it's kind of where we show off, where we our light shines. Whereas the moon is kind of more of this force that's like the needy, sensitive, like, it's like going around and you're in a bad mood and ruminating about these things that trouble us, and needing, like having a bad habit, like I think things like alcoholism or is very lunar or something, or having like, oh, don't give me a hard time, I just need this to get through the day, and and there's something about like where it's like, don't, you shouldn't be so critical of me, I got, that kind of stuff. And like Mars is like, when you put Mars there's this thing where it's like pressing that sensitive spot, it's like this thing that we use. We might have these, the Cancer is all about comfort, right? It's about, comfort foods, the comforts of home, the comfort of family. And Mars is like, it's like, what do what is it that we're trying to cover up with with comfort food, like, oh, I've had a bad day, I'm gonna eat a tub of ice cream. Oh, it's kind of like that's like the Cancer thing. And I think Mars is like a little bit like it's like it's Mars is a bit more confrontational, right? Mars is like, what is this thing that you are covering up? What is this thing that you are glossing over? And it's gonna try to maybe like confront and call out. But there's this kind of thing about like, no, don't, just don't do that. So I think like that's where you get this thing with Mars and Cancer that can be like, it doesn't it wants to avoid the direct confrontation, right? Because it's the lunar quality is like hypersensitive, and it does, to avoid that direct confrontation. You get this thing where Mars and Cancer could be maybe like passive aggressive, right? Where, or like you do something like, rather than being like directly calling it out or like laying it down, you kind of go sideways about it. And I don't want to like just copy from other people here, but I've been doing clubhouse groups with Spencer Michaud, and he had this really good one that was about like the crab, right? How the crab kind of like goes like back sideways kind of thing. And so it's like kind of one step forward, one step back. That might be this kind of indirect approach, right? Because there's something about like if you think about Mars and Aries, where Mars has this dignity, that would be an example of a very direct Mars. Like if there's something on your mind, you just say it, and like you don't waste any time, and you have to make a break for it. You're whatever, right? When it's kind of out in the open, maybe with Mars and Aries, right? Where with Mars and Cancer, it's kind of more like, it's like you kind of understand that it might be too much to just go right in there and grab him with the pincers. So you're kind of doing the shuffle back and forth dance to kind of like, it's also maybe a little bit like walking on eggshells around the problem, not really directly approaching the situation. So this is all stuff that kind of goes with Mars and Cancer. And I thought there's a time there too where it was kind of interesting, because like it really felt like this sort of like, there's a sort of emotionally heavy, weepy kind of thing. Like as what I noticed where I live in BC is, as soon as Mars went to Cancer, the weather got cooler. It got more rain clouds. So this is kind of like this atmosphere of like the dark and heavy clouds, and it's like that if this swelling up of emotion kind of thing. But why I didn't want to make this just a Mars and Cancer video is because at the same time, like right now as I'm making this video, the Sun is applying a conjunction to Uranus in Taurus, right? And so, I mean, Taurus is an earth sign, so it kind of maybe tends to more like relaxed, kind of laid back. People say like Taurus is very habitual and stuff like this, but Uranus is like the lightning bolt electric charge. It's like the Tower card in tarot, getting hit by the lightning bolt, disrupting things. And so what I'm noticing is that there's this energy in the midst of all that stuff that I just said about the Mars and Cancer stuff. There's this real electric charge coming through with the Sun and Uranus. We also just had this triple conjunction with Venus, Mercury, and Uranus and Taurus. And so like you probably have already seeing the effect of the Venus, Mercury, Uranus dynamic, and now the Sun is coming to keep it going. If you didn't see it already, you're going to be seeing it now, kind of thing, right? And so there's something about, I don't know. Like I've been noticing, I don't want to get into all my private personal stuff, or bring up other people's stuff, but in the midst of this Taurus Uranus thing going on, I've had a number of people that I haven't spoken to in quite a while all contact me at the same time, which is kind of interesting. So there's something about like a little bit of that kind of unexpected kind of Uranus thing with like, oh, I didn't expect this person to be talking to me right now. And it's also that there's a kind of like this sort of like electric kind of manic kind of charge with it sometimes. But I think there's something also that I've noticed too with um the whole thing about Mercury and Venus right now is that, if you remember, we had a Venus cazimi in Aries and we had a Mercury cazimi in Aries, and in the moment of cazimi, they're in the heart of the sun, right? And these planets, they're still really close to the sun, so they're considered combust. They're kind of like the cazimi is a kind of a moment of being reborn, right? Um, but while they're combust, they're obscured by the light of the sun, and so it's not really the stuff. I mean, if you think about, it's basically the relational planets, right? Because Venus has to do with friends and relationships and as well as some other things, right? Like money and aesthetics and stuff like that. But and Mercury being the communicator and stuff like that. So there's a sense that there's like a kind of like there's this kind of electric kind of charge coming through with Uranus, but it kind of feels like it's not very clear also in a way. Like it doesn't feel like it's still obscured by the light of the sun being so close. And eventually we get Venus and Mercury emerging from being under the beams of the sun later on when they're in Gemini. And we get Mercury going to Gemini less than a week from now, and Venus going into Gemini approximately 2 weeks from now. And I think like Venus comes out of the beams like I'm not doing my and I'm not doing this thing where I'm throwing my app up here and I'm showing you guys all the little details of the transits. I'm just doing this by memory basically. But I from memory, I think that the time that Venus comes out of the beams is probably around May 22nd. I think if like I just kind of like as best as I can remember right now, but it's more until like late May that this stuff emerges out of the beams of the sun. So we've still got a while before we get some actual like clarity here. And by the time that happens, it's going to be in a different sign. It's going to be like if you go by your like what your birth chart is, it's going to be hitting a different part of your birth chart than it is now, a different whole sign house. Um and so it's still like it's like things are still kind of cooking, they're still kind of developing, and it's sort of like that's kind of what I'm getting from this whole Uranus thing going on, is that there's some kind of Uranus has this force of changing things up, shaking things up, and I'm definitely feeling some of this like shake up, change up kind of. But it also feels like the dust hasn't really settled, and it's like the big lightning bolt explosion, and like, but you don't really know what is really happening until the smoke clears. If that makes any sense. Um, so that's kind of where I'm at with this. It is an interesting time though, especially once we get like the sun is perfecting this conjunction with Uranus. There might be like certain like the eureka moment, the light bulb goes off, where you get some new inspiration, you get a new idea. It could also be like there could be like a change of plan or something, right? Like that's what I'm kind of like. I'm not going to get into. I'm kind of dealing with a change in housing situation right now, and I'm not going to. I'm not going to get into all that right now, but it's this thing where things are changing, but I'm not quite sure if it's, like maybe there might be something else, some other development around the corner that have not yet foreseen, that it might not be, the story may not all be set right now, right? So all these kinds of things make it a really kind of dynamic time. I if you want, I have a group on Facebook. If you still do the Facebook thing called Current Events Astrology, where I keep track of what's happening in the news, and I've noticed that the other day Biden was in the news because he just announced a pretty progressive plan to do with health. What is it? It was like college, like a kind of like community college program that would be free to provide accessible education as well as like childcare and stuff like that. And so a lot of people, I'm not. My point in this channel is not to be like super political, but I do think, and I mean, but some people have been critical of Biden of just being just as bad as Trump with a lot of the things he's doing, but at least you can see something with the Sun and Uranus here. I mean, the Sun being a universal significator for leaders, that it's like there is the force of change at play, right? There is a change, a kind of progressive change in the program, and you could see that with some of these promises for like public education and public childcare and bringing back welfare programs and stuff like that. But also, I mean, to keep in mind that this is all happening in a square to Saturn, which is Saturn in its own sign, Saturn in Aquarius, which is a really strong Saturn. And in Hellenistic astrology, Aquarius is in a superior square to Taurus. So there might be, I don't know, like there's certain forces to contend with where the progressive liberating force of Uranus is working under a kind of constrained situation with the force of Saturn, where it's not like you might not get everything you're looking for right now. You know what I mean? You're not getting the whole delivery of like your instant gratification. That's another theme that's come up in some of the conversations I've had with Spencer, is the delayed gratification, in that you might not just get everything you want right away, and that you might kind of have to like be patient. For one thing, that's a good Saturn lesson, is learning how to be patient and not just sort of reach, you don't just get the cookie right when you want it. You got to kind of work for it with Saturn. You know what I mean? There's something else which is kind of interesting that I was thinking about with Saturn, is this whole thing about, I mean, you could talk about it with gratification, but it's also something to do with comfort, right? And that there's something about the lesson of getting over, I mean, it kind of maybe fits in with this lunar stuff with the Mars and Cancer too, about how like Cancer likes to be comfortable, likes to have the comfort foods, the comforts of home and family, all this kind of stuff. There's something though about Saturn and Aquarius, which it's like it's sort of like if you want the reward, you might have to like get over this thing about just doing what's the most comfortable thing to do. You know what I mean? It's like that there's Saturn in Aquarius, it's like it's kind of like there's something about the water pourer, right? Where it's like the water pourer was somebody who served the king, but that the actual the myth of it, or the tradition of it was like the person who served the king was castrated, and they were the trusted servant, but they only got there because they made a kind of a sacrifice, which is, I mean, fucking, it's, sorry, I don't want to swear in my my astrology videos, but it's like it brings into, there's a kind of a deep thing if you get into Freudian castration anxiety and stuff like that, right? But it's like it's really, you're somebody sacrificing their own personal pleasure, their own personal gratification for the sake of being of service, right? And it's like I mean, it's this kind of this thing of like, are you the person who is being really needy, that you really need comfort, you really need, people to like help you out and do all these things for you and coddle you and make everything nice? Or are you like, you kind of realize that like, if you're to be in a position to do that, to be a good influence, to be providing something that's helpful for other people, like it's like you kind of have to put your own needs aside, and you need to be giving or something like that. You need to be like acting out of, not just out of your own self-interest, like I want this, I want that, but more about like what kind of thing what can I offer, what kind of sacrifice can I make, right? And it's like, but when you're in, I think that's one thing, one of the positive influences of Saturn and Aquarius is really getting outside of this thing where it's all about me and what can I do to make me happy, right? And like how do I feel comfortable? How do I feel pleasurable? How do I ease my anxiety and my angst? And like, please give me but more about like what kind of sacrifices do I need to make? What kind of things or do I need to give up? Where can I sober up and straighten up and clean up? You know what I mean? Like, these are the kind of things that people, you know, maybe this is a Saturnine, more disciplined, self-disciplined way to approach the problem, and I think that is really coming through right now, and it can kind of create an interesting sort of like there's an interesting sort of clash there between Mars in Cancer and Saturn in Aquarius, because for one thing, these signs are in aversion by a whole sign aspect. There is an interesting conversation, though. I was reading Manilius, and Manilius actually suggested that there was a kind of a hidden affinity between Cancer and Aquarius. That there is something, but I mean, I don't know. That's kind of a wormhole. I don't even know if wormholes are a rabbit hole to go down. If anybody has any insider information about the secret affinity between Cancer and Aquarius, please let me know. I'm interested to hear what you have to. Maybe it has to do with a contra antitia or antitia or something. I don't know. But these are some basic thoughts on the current transits happening right now. I've kind of been going a bit like rapid fire. I probably condensed a lot of information down into these like 20 odd minutes because it's Sun conjunct Uranus, and I probably shouldn't be drinking so much coffee. I've gone sober. I even put it on my. I have a Buy Me a Coffee page, by the way, and I put it on my Buy Me the Coffee page that I'm like, I'm just gonna spend this money on books because I don't even need caffeine right now. And this video, let me know if I'm like too jacked up on caffeine here. I could just be jacked up on my love for astrology as well. But anyways, if you feel free to like check out my Buy Me a Coffee page if you want to make a donation, and if you want more highly caffeinated astrology videos. Otherwise, I will spend it on books and such. Thank you very much.